Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel. Today, we're diving deep, literally, into one of the most crucial moments of the 20th century. A moment that could have changed the course of human history as we know it. We're talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis, but more importantly, about a man named Vasily Arkhipov, the person who many believe saved the world from nuclear catastrophe. So stick around because you won't want to miss this unbelievable story of courage, decision-making, and how close humanity came to its own destruction. The Cold War was a period of geopolitical tension between the United States and the Soviet Union, along with their respective allies, from the end of Second World War in 1945 until the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Although the two superpowers never engaged in a full-scale war, their rivalry led to various proxy wars, espionage, and an ideological struggle for global influence. The tension primarily stemmed from conflicting ideologies: capitalism as practiced by the United States and its allies, and communism as advocated by the Soviet Union. Both nations believed their system of governance and economics was superior and sought to spread it around the globe. This led to confrontations in various parts of the world, including Europe, the Berlin Wall, Asia, Korean War, Vietnam War, Africa, and Latin America. One of the most alarming aspects of the Cold War was the nuclear arms race. Both the United States and the Soviet Union engaged in an escalating process of amassing nuclear weapons and the means to deliver them. The idea of mutually assured destruction, MAD, took hold, where each side had enough firepower to annihilate the other, thus supposedly discouraging the actual use of these weapons. This escalation led to the development and stockpiling of increasingly sophisticated and destructive arsenals, including intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, SLBMs, and eventually multiple independently chargeable reentry vehicles, (IRVs). The proliferation of these devastating weapons made the stakes in the Cold War exceptionally high. In April 1961, the United States sponsored an invasion of Cuba, aimed at overthrowing the communist regime of Fidel Castro. Known as the Bay of Pigs invasion, this operation ended in a humiliating defeat for the US-backed Cuban exiles. The failed invasion not only consolidated Castro's power, but also pushed Cuba further into the Soviet sphere of influence, setting the stage for what would become the Cuban Missile Crisis. In 1962, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev approved the placement of Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba. This decision was partly in response to the US placing nuclear missiles in Turkey and Italy, which were close to Soviet borders, and partly as a way to deter future American aggression against Cuba. When American reconnaissance flights discovered the missile sites under construction, it led to a 13-day standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union, bringing the world perilously close to nuclear war. Vasily Arkhipov was born on January 30, 1926, in the small town of Zvorkovo, near Moscow, Russia. His upbringing was modest, as he was raised in a family of limited means during a tumultuous time in Russian history. Growing up in the shadows of the Russian Revolution and the subsequent civil wars, Arkhipov was part of a generation that was deeply influenced by the emergence of the Soviet state. Arkhipov joined the Soviet Navy in 1942, amidst the chaos of Second World War. At the time, the Soviet Union was engaged in a desperate struggle against Nazi Germany, and young men like Arkhipov were urgently needed to bolster the country's defenses. Despite the hardships and the high risks involved, serving in the Navy offered Arkhipov an opportunity for both personal and professional development. He attended the Caspian Higher Naval School before later transferring to the Pacific Higher Naval School. The rigorous training he received was aimed at preparing cadets for the complexities of naval warfare, from navigation to weaponry, and from strategy to leadership. Arkhipov proved to be a dedicated and capable student, laying a strong foundation for his future naval career. After the end of World War, Arkhipov continued to serve in the Soviet Navy, where he quickly gained a reputation for his skills, professionalism, and leadership. He served in various capacities, from on board different classes of submarines to holding instructional and staff positions. In the late 1950s, he participated in some of the Soviet Union's earliest attempts at establishing a nuclear submarine fleet. The B-59 was a Foxtrot-class submarine of the Soviet Navy, designed for anti-ship and anti-submarine warfare. It was part of a group of submarines dispatched to the Caribbean in support of Soviet interests during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Vasily Arkhipov was serving as the flotilla commodore and the second in command on this particular vessel. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, President John F. Kennedy imposed a naval blockade, which he termed a quarantine, around Cuba to prevent further shipment of Soviet military supplies to the island. The B-59 was detected by American naval forces on October 27, 1962, and was forced to dive to avoid detection, thus losing its ability to communicate with Moscow. U.S. Navy ships began dropping depth charges, explosives intended to force the submarine to surface for identification. While these depth charges were not intended to destroy the sub, the crew inside the B-59 had no way of knowing that. Running low on air, enduring high levels of carbon dioxide, and suffering from extreme heat, the crew was under the impression that war had already broken out between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. Inside the B-59, tensions ran extremely high. The sub's captain, Valentin Savitsky, believing that war had commenced, wanted to launch a nuclear torpedo at the U.S. fleet. According to Soviet military protocol of the time, the decision to launch nuclear torpedoes on board a submarine required the consent of the sub's top 3 officers: the captain, the political officer, and the flotilla commodore, Arkhipov, in this case. The political officer, Ivan Maslenikov, agreed with Savitsky's assessment and was prepared to launch. It was Arkhipov who disagreed, arguing that the depth charges were likely a signal to surface and not an act of war. Despite immense pressure and in a charged environment with limited information, Arkhipov stood his ground. His experience, perhaps informed by the prior incident aboard the K-19, may have given him a unique perspective on the dire consequences of a hasty decision. Arkhipov argued that they should surface the submarine and await orders from Moscow, thereby averting the immediate launch of a nuclear weapon that could have led to a large-scale nuclear war. In an extraordinary act of leadership, Arkhipov managed to convince the other 2 senior officers to follow his course of action. The submarine surfaced, re-established communication with Moscow, and the crisis was diffused for the time being. Arkhipov's calm under extreme pressure and his decisive action at a crucial moment arguably saved the world from a devastating nuclear war. Arkhipov's decision was one among several critical moments that led to the de-escalation of the Cuban Missile Crisis. On the American side, President Kennedy and his advisors also exercised restraint, opting for a blockade rather than a full-scale invasion of Cuba. Backdoor negotiations were ongoing, leading to an eventual agreement whereby the United States promised not to invade Cuba and to dismantle missile bases in Turkey, while the Soviet Union agreed to remove its nuclear weapons from Cuba. The crisis also laid the groundwork for future arms control agreements, such as the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, as the world recognized just how close it had come to nuclear Armageddon. So that wraps up the incredible story of Vasily Arkhipov. One man, one decision, and a world forever changed. It's a stark reminder of the power of critical thinking and moral courage. If you enjoyed this, hit that like button and share this story. Until next time.